Option 2, which we just discussed with the 65 and 95 gallon, was recommended by the Public Works Finance Committee when presented on March 23rd. All options included the $182,500 in one-time startup costs for the program. Option 2 added $303,167 in annual costs to provide single stream services in addition to that one-time startup cost. Staff is projecting that the FY15 sanitation budget will carry over $135,500 in unrestricted fund balance based on the FY14 audit. Whoops. Staff is projecting an additional $85,222 in surplus revenues in the current FY15 sanitation budget. Total projected fund surplus for the current FY15 sanitation budget will be $220,722. The surplus is a result of a couple different lines in the sanitation operations budget. One of those is solid waste development line, which we budget $120,000 in the current budget. And this is for programs such as single stream and other programs that come along the pike. Staff anticipates expending only $20,000 of this line in the current budget. The FY15 sanitation budget also contains a line for operating contingency. This line is budgeted for unanticipated operating or facility emergencies. This contingency line contained $131,865 in the 15 budget. Staff does not anticipate any expenses from this line in FY 2015. Public Works Finance Committee directed staff to be prepared to discuss how much of the one-time startup cost and annual cost of the single stream recycling program could be covered by the city. Staff analysis of the FY15 sanitation budget indicates that the one-time startup cost of $182,500 for single stream recycling could be absorbed with surplus within the current FY15 sanitation budget. If council chooses to have the sanitation fund absorb these one-time startup costs, it would result in a 20-cent per month reduction in new single stream recycling costs to each customer.
So I have to stop you, Mayor, and ask a question, if I might. Does that come off the 172?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So it'd be 152.
The 2012 Comprehensive Sanitation Rate Study adopted by Council concluded that collection rates or fees were generating more than the overall revenue needs of the collection service. In other words, we were charging too much for collection services back then. The rate study also concluded that the existing revenue for solid waste processing facility was not meeting the annual expenses. What we're talking about there is tipping fees. Beginning with the FY13 budget, sanitation rate adjustments were made to correct these findings. Collection rates were reduced, and with the exception of the adjustments made to cover the cost of the solid waste roll cart collection program, they have not increased since. The rate study called for a 3% increase to collection rates beginning in the current FY15 budget. Sanitation collection rates were not increased in the FY15 due to the stability of the fund and as a result of the roll cart program and the elimination of the tag system. The rate study also called for immediate tipping fee increases at the solid waste processing facility of 3% annually beginning in FY13. Contractual disposal obligations to Latah County and the cities limits these increases to that of the annual average CPI adjustments. So we weren't able to adjust those tipping fees at 3% a year like the rate study called for, but rather the CPI adjustment. While collection rates have not been increased in the last 3 years, the sanitation fund has absorbed 5.8% contractual expense increases to LSI for things such as collection services, solid waste processing facility services, recycling services, and another 3.53% contractual expense increases for the long haul and MSW disposal services to Waste Connections over the past 3 years. Contractual service increases for the upcoming FY16 budget are anticipated to add an additional 1.5% expense across the board. The rate study included a capital improvement plan and schedule comprised of land acquisition related to the recycling center expansion, and long-term disposal option feasibility studies. Capital fund improvement monies have not been spent as scheduled in the plan due to the fact that single-stream recycling is currently being contemplated, and the effects of the new program may likely change some facets of the expansion plans. Neither the solid waste roll cart collection program or single-stream recycling program were considered at the time that the rate study was performed. We currently only have 1.5 years of history with the solid waste roll cart program and none of our own history regarding a single-stream recycling program and the effects that it may have on the solid waste collection revenues. Sanitation Capital Projects Fund has a balance of $2.9 million as audited following the FY14 budget year. The projected FY15 ending balance of the Capital Projects Fund is $3.439 million, and that will be met as planned by the rate study schedule. Sanitation Operations Fund has maintained transfers to the Capital Fund and maintained the revenue schedule as adopted in the comprehensive rate study to this point. Future budget models indicate that modest increases may be necessary with the addition of single stream to maintain the capital improvement schedule as called out in the rate study. The FY16 budget model indicates that there will be a deficit of $426,467 with the added expenses of the new single stream program if no adjustments are implemented. The FY16 budget model also indicates that with a 1.5% increase to tipping fees and a 3% increase to collection services, as called for in the rate study, there will still be a deficit of $301,244 with the added expenses of the new single-stream recycling program. The budget model indicates that with a 1.5% increase to tipping fees, a 3% increase to collection services as called for in the rate study, and new single-stream costs passed on to the customer, the fund will be in balance. All of these scenarios assume that the city absorbs that $182,500 in one-time startup costs from the current FY15 budget. The sanitation fund cannot absorb additional single-stream costs without tapping into the sanitation capital fund or deviating from the rate study capital improvement schedule. This is what the new rates would look like with the city absorbs one-time startup costs, increases collection rates by 3%, and passes on the new single-stream costs to the customer. You can see the numbers.
So what you're saying is that option number 2 can be reduced from $1.72 to $1.52.
Correct.
After all, thank you for all that information. Okay.
Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was hopeful to do this without increasing rates, but in having just seen that just now, unless John Weber caught something I didn't catch, it doesn't look like we can do that. I'm like Dan. I feel people's pain as we raise taxes, raise fees, et cetera, but the city's got to have enough income to maintain services. I understand that. I get it. I'm certainly not a no tax increase guy in the black and white sense. But we do have a lot of money in capital. We don't have any plans to spend it. We have not increased rates for the past 3 years, if I followed you correctly. We've held that. Tim, what would happen if we absorbed the 182,500 and passed 50% of the 152 onto the customer and did a new rate study in a year to see where we are on single stream and solid waste totes? And then if it calls for it, do what we need to do. We have 3.5 million in capital are projected to at the end of this year, so we're not sitting here looking at zeros. I'm certainly not proposing that we spend that $3.5 million picking this up. That's not my point. But do we have enough cash without a set plan to spend it that we could pass a partial, pick up the 182.5 and pass half of the other cost on to the consumers while we see what all this does?
Which would be 76 cents.
Yes, sir. I knew I could find a question that would get Mr. Palmer up.
Well, Don, if I may, while Don is finding his slide that he's trying to bring up, part of the issue we have here, those of you who attended the quarterly breakfast meeting last week saw some numbers that were brought up that were, the cost of sanitation is huge when you start talking about closure costs, the costs of, I think Mark Story, the Public Works Director for Whitman County, indicated their solid waste transfer facility, they're into it about $5 million so far. We will have $3.4 million at the end of FY 2015. We still anticipate that the recycling center, it will either be moved or expanded. Single stream recycling was not the use of that facility, so that's still under consideration. And I think the council needs to remember that at the time the rate study was conducted, roll carts weren't a certainty. That we are only into those about a year and a half right now. Certainly there were some benefits that have already been passed on to the ratepayers so far. Single stream recycling will include a lot more of that waste stream going to recycling. It's a volume-based system. So if you have people who would go, for instance, from a 65-gallon cart to a 35-gallon cart for solid waste, MSW, or a 95 to a 65, you're going to see a reduction in rate there. My caution is that, yes, we are online with the rate study at this point. However, with a reduction of almost $500,000 per year, without knowing what the impacts of either single stream recycling will have on the roll cart program, we're really putting our financial stability at risk. Now, the council in the past has been very receptive to changing solid waste rates. In fact, from the time that we initially started off with the volume-based system in the early 90s, there was a rate that was put out there that the council thought, staff thought we were going to need, became clear that it was too high. We slashed the rate, the council slashed that rate by over half. And then we went too far on the lean side. So then we attempted to balance that over the years. So I guess what I'm asking the council to consider, the rate study was put together very I guess, in a workmanlike manner by folks in the city, appointed by the council. This is a long-range situation. Until we know what the stability of the sanitation is going to be with those two new programs, I would, I guess, advise the council to stay the course with the anticipated rate increases as called out by the study. And then, after perhaps this program is in place for a year and a half, we can see how it's going to balance out, council very clearly can change it at that point. And again, we'll likely have a better plan, a better knowledge of what the actual capital costs will be at that point.